David Schimpf, and this is my podcast for Dave's Dugout. But today I am going to speak on the spirit of America and the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Normally I do this on Wednesday, but I was unable to do it on Wednesday, so I'm doing it today. So I'm hoping that you can tune in. My toll-free number is 8337-DUGOUT. That's 8337-DUGOUT. So if you'd like to call, make a comment, talk, or anytime while I'm doing this broadcast, please do. My phone number is usually open from noon to 6 p.m. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the signers of the Declaration of Independence. I talked last week on John Hancock and why his signature was so important and why he made it so large. And so today we're going to talk about the signers, the rest of the signers from Massachusetts, the one of the 13 colonies, one of the major 13 colonies. And it was known as the most rebellious one of the 13 colonies. And that was probably due to the Boston Massacre, which took place in 1770, when 5 Americans, including a black man named Crispus Attucks, was killed in a street fight with British soldiers. Samuel Adams named this clash the Boston Massacre and used it to stir up hatred against the British. 3 years later, Samuel Adams organized the Boston Tea Party, and the revolution began when the British tried to capture Samuel Adams and his friend John Hancock in Lexington, Kentucky, Massachusetts. Okay, so that's basically how it all started. And besides Samuel Adams and John Hancock, Massachusetts' other signers were Samuel's cousin John Adams, Robert Treat Payne, and Eldridge Gerry. Later, Hancock, Samuel Adams, and Gerry all served as governor of the Bay State. Payne was the first attorney general, and John Adams served as the second president of the United States. So there's a big history concerning Massachusetts. Now we're going to talk about each signer from Massachusetts today. All right, we're going to try and cover at least 2 of the 4 that are left. I'm going to talk about Samuel Adams and John Adams. Okay, now Samuel Adams was born on September 27th, 1722. And he was 53 at the age of the signing. He was married to Elizabeth Checkley, and they had 6 children, and also Betsy Wells. So he was married twice. He had 6 children, and his death was October 2nd, 1803. And he was 81 when he died. All right? So let's get on with Samuel Adams. Now, he was called the father of American independence, probably because he was the one that basically got the revolutions began with the Boston Massacre and how he stirred up the colonists. So more than anyone else, this Massachusetts man ignited America's rebellion against England. Despite graduating from Harvard, Samuel failed at nearly everything he tried for many years. See, here's another person who failed many times. And again, you can't say it enough times. If you fail, try again. And that was the way Samuel Adams was. He went to work at a Boston counting house, a business similar to a bank. Samuel lost that job because he spent his time talking politics. His father gave him a large sum of money to start any business he wanted. Samuel passed along half the money to a needy friend, and he somehow lost the other half. Another failure. The bottom line was that all the money was gone. His father then put Samuel to work in the family brewery. Samuel neglected the business until it was eventually destroyed. Boy, he was apparently he had a hard time accepting responsibility. Bostonians elected Samuel to the job of tax collector. People who wanted to avoid paying their taxes would not have picked a better man, as he instead listened to his neighbors' tales of woe about their financial problems. He felt sorry for them and ended up collecting little of the money. Again, a job he failed at. Wow. There's a lot of things here about Samuel Adams even I didn't know. Samuel had 6 children with his first wife, Elizabeth Checkley. After she died, he married Betsy Wells, with whom he didn't have any children. It was said that Samuel Adams was so poor that his family would have starved had not the rich merchant John Hancock helped support them. So Hancock helped support them, or they would have starved to death. Wow, Samuel Adams really had a problem. Then there was one thing that one could do as well as Samuel Adams. By the 1760s, he was the most outspoken critic of England. He and Patrick Henry of Virginia both argued in favor of independence by about 1765 and are considered the first Americans to do so. So, one thing that Samuel Adams was strong at was political discussion, especially against for independence and against King George. But while Patrick made speeches, Samuel wrote thousands of letters about British injustice, which he sent to newspapers and colonial leaders around the country. He signed the newspaper letters with dozens of false names. This gave readers the impression that all of Boston was up in arms when really just Samuel Adams was doing much of the complaining. So, wow, he was kind of treacherous when it came to this. So he was using false names and in doing so. Samuel also recruited young men and turned them into revolutionaries. Paul Revere, Samuel's cousin John Adams, and John Hancock all considered Samuel their political father, as Revere expressed it. All three became more famous than their political father. That was fine with Samuel Adams, who liked to remain in the shadows and let others receive the credit. So he wasn't one to pat himself on the back, so to speak. Samuel Adams took part in some of the main events that sparked the revolution. One was the Tea Party, of course. He organized Boston's Sons of Liberty, a group of rebels who protested British injustice by destroying British property and picking fights with British officials. Dozens of towns throughout the 13 colonies formed Sons of Liberty organizations modeled after the famous group in Boston. Wow. So there you go. The Sons of Liberty, which is well known throughout the colonies, okay? England passed a tax on tea. Samuel planned the Boston Tea Party and gave the signal for the tea to be destroyed. That was when they dressed up like Native Americans and went on the ships and destroyed the tea. He also began the Committee of Correspondence, the letter-writing networks which colonial leaders would keep in touch. The British called Samuel Adams a grand incendiary, meaning someone who stirs up trouble and the most dangerous man in Massachusetts. Wow. Samuel Adams may have failed at a lot of things, but he certainly didn't fail at that. The rebellion began when the British marched to Lexington, Massachusetts, in an attempt to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Fortunately, Paul Revere warned Adams and Hancock of the enemy's approach, allowing them to slip away. Soon after the war began, the British offered to pardon all Americans who would lay down their arms and return to the duties of peaceful objectives. Except for two persons, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Everybody else maybe gave in. Had Britain won the war, the pair probably would have been among the first Americans executed. That's probably very true. But Americans triumphed, and a grateful nation called Samuel Adams the father of American independence and the father of the Revolution. Thomas Jefferson called him truly the man of the Revolution. Later in life, Adams served as governor of the new state of Massachusetts from 1793 to 1797. Following his death, his deeds were largely forgotten, and he faded back into the shadows. He wouldn't have minded, for he often said that he worked not for the personal glory, but so that millions yet unborn could enjoy their independence. Wow. Does that say a lot about Samuel Adams? He wasn't out there for the glory. He just wanted Americans to enjoy their independence, and he strived for that. and that was why he was one of the signers. He was one of the delegates from Massachusetts. Of course, we all know about Samuel Adams when it comes to beer, but and I can understand that. But so to speak, that is what Samuel Adams was known for. How amazing! How absolutely amazing! Okay, now uh, we're going to go to John Adams. He was born October 10th, 1735, and he was only 40 when he signed the Declaration of Independence. He was married to Abigail Smith, and he wrote many letters to Abigail, by the way, his wife. And they had 5 children. Now, here's a real oddity. He died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed. And he died on the same day as Thomas Jefferson. Very, very odd. And his age at death was 90 years old. So John Adams died at age 90. Okay. Now let's do some talking about John Adams. Okay. John Adams was noted for "survive or perish with my country" was one of his quotes. Survive or perish with my country. He was the second president of the United States after George Washington. He was his vice president. Born in Braintree, today Quincy, near Boston in 1735, John graduated from Harvard also, then taught school for a year, although he later claimed that he learned all that he needed to know about human nature from his students. He was not very fond of teaching, so he returned to the study of law. Just after he became an attorney, he met Abigail Smith. He and Miss Adorable, as he called her, he met, was married, and they were married in 1764. The couple had 5 children, like I said, and enjoyed a lifelong love that after that ended only with their death after 54 years of marriage. So they were married for quite a while. 54 years is quite an accomplishment, especially in those days. The many letters that John and Abigail Adams exchanged when apart provided with us a vivid picture of revolutionary times. Like many other young men, John was led to the patriotic cause by his cousin Samuel Adams. In 1770, John was elected to the Massachusetts legislature, where he and Samuel spearheaded the fight against English oppression. John served as a Continental Congress from 1774 to 1777. One of his hardest working congressmen, he woke at 4 each morning and kept going until 10 at night. Wow. Now, those are some long days. He was only getting 5-6 hours of sleep a night. By 1775, he believed the Americans must become independent. The die is now cast, he wrote in a letter. Sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish. With my country is an unalterable determination. What a quote. Sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish. That's how he felt about the independence, how strong he was about it. Thanks partly to John's efforts, a new nation survived. In Congress, he and his cousin were instrumental in appointing George Washington to command the Continental Army. As a member of the committee assigned to draft the Declaration, he convinced Thomas Jefferson to do the writing. Years later, Adams described his discussion with Jefferson about it. He said, "You should do it." "Oh, no," Jefferson said. "Why not you? You ought to do it." Jefferson said, "I will not." "Why?" "Reasons enough." What can be your reasons?" "Reason first, you are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to appear at the head of this business. Reason second, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. Reason three, You can write 10 times better than I can. Thomas Jefferson, well, if you are decided, I will do as well as I can. So that's basically the conversation. And he wrote that down in a letter form. So it's for everybody to read from that day forward. Okay? John Adams and Benjamin Franklin made a few minor changes in Jefferson's uh, stirring document that called for a new nation to arms. John Adams put his John Hancock on the declaration right below his cousin Samuel's signature. So he signed his name right below Samuel's. Early in 1778, Congress sent John Adams to obtain help for America in France. John and Abigail decided that their 10-year-old son, John Quincy Adams, who, by the way, would become another president, should go too. So John and John Quincy Adams were at sea when their ship engaged in a battle with a British vessel. John grabbed his musket and went out on deck with his young son. Suddenly, a cannonball slammed into the ship near where the father and son were standing. Had it struck a few feet away, it might have killed two very famous patriots. And who knows where we would have been. Following the revolution, John Adams helped negotiate the peace treaty. He later served his country in many ways. In the first election for president in 1789, George Washington received the most votes. John Adams came in second. So by method then used, Washington became president and Adams became the vice president. That's the method they used back then. Then to 1796, John Adams was elected as the second president, and he held that office from 1797 until 1801, so only 4 years, okay? Abigail didn't live long enough to see it, but John Adams was still alive when his son, John Quincy Adams, took office as the nation's sixth president. How remarkable. John Adams was the second president. John Quincy Adams was the sixth president. And that happened in 1825. Until George and George W. Bush and John Quincy Adams were the only father and son to ever hold office as presidents. Okay, John Adams remained vigorous until his late 80s, walking 3 miles a day. By remarkable coincidence, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. The last words uttered by the 90-year-old John Adams was, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." But little did he know that Thomas Jefferson died just a few hours before he did. So basically, he survived and not Thomas Jefferson. So that's the story on John Adams. Now, the next two signers I'm going to talk about next Wednesday, and that is Robert Treat Paine and Eldridge Gerry. So we're going to talk about the other two signers next Wednesday, okay? But it's very interesting to know the history on the Adams. Samuel Adams, John Adams, and John Quincy Adams. Wow, two famous patriots of the Revolutionary War and signers of the Declaration of Independence. Where would we be without the Adams? Where would we be? So I hope you enjoyed this session. It's a little bit short, but it's a little bit muggy in here. It's a muggy day and smoky outside. And I didn't want to open the doors because the smoke could get in from all these fires up in Canada that come down in here in Michigan. So hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to you watching my next podcast on the Spirit of America. Have a great day.